I had just gotten my real estate license and was excited to begin my career. I was eager to show my first house, which was located in a quiet suburban neighborhood. I had been in contact with the client, a middle-aged man named Blair, for a few days, and he seemed pleasant enough on the phone. However, when I met him in person, I immediately felt uneasy. He was tall and thin, with a pale face and dark circles under his eyes. His hair was slicked back, and his clothes were slightly disheveled. As we shook hands, I couldn't help but notice his clammy skin and the strange smell emanating from his body. Despite my initial discomfort, I put on a professional demeanor and began to show him the house. Blair seemed interested in the property, nodding as I pointed out the various features and amenities. However, he also seemed to be very interested in me. He kept asking me personal questions, such as whether I was married or had children. He would also touch me on the arm or shoulder whenever he had a question or comment. At first, I tried to brush it off as harmless friendliness. But as we continued to walk through the house, his behavior became more unsettling. He would stand uncomfortably close to me, making me feel trapped. He would make inappropriate comments about my appearance, saying things like, "You're much prettier than the last agent I worked with." I began to feel more and more uncomfortable, but I didn't want to be rude. After all, I was new to the industry and eager to make a good impression. Finally, we finished the tour, and I breathed a sigh of relief as we stepped outside. As I began to pack up my things, Blair suddenly asked me if I wanted to grab a coffee with him. I hesitated, unsure of how to respond. I didn't want to offend him, but I also didn't want to be alone with him. He must have sensed my hesitation because he quickly added, "Just as friends, of course. I'd love to get to know you better." I reluctantly agreed, hoping that it would be a quick, harmless interaction. We drove to a nearby coffee shop, and I ordered a small latte. Blair insisted on paying for it, despite my protests. As we sat down at a small table, I felt my heart racing. I didn't know what to say, and Blair seemed to be doing all the talking. He told me about his job, his hobbies, and his travels. He asked me more personal questions, such as where I grew up and what my parents did for a living. The whole time, he was staring at me with an intense gaze that made me feel uncomfortable. His smile seemed forced, and his eyes seemed to be constantly darting around, as if he was looking for something. After about half an hour, I made an excuse to leave. Blair seemed disappointed but thanked me for my time. As we parted ways, he squeezed my hand tightly and said, "I hope we can do this again soon." Over the next few days, Blair began calling and texting me incessantly. He would ask me out to lunch, invite me to parties, and even offer to take me on a weekend getaway. I politely declined each time, but he persisted. One day, I arrived at my office to find a bouquet of flowers on my desk. There was a note attached, which read, "For the lovely real estate agent who stole my heart." I felt my stomach churn as I read the words, realizing that Blair had crossed a line. I immediately called my boss and told him about the flowers and the ongoing harassment. He assured me that he would handle the situation and advised me to block Blair's number and email address. For a few days, things seemed to calm down. I didn't hear from Blair, and I was able to focus on my work. One evening, I was walking back to my car after a long day of showings. It was dark outside, and I was alone on the quiet street. As I approached my car, I noticed a figure standing in the shadows nearby. At first, I thought it might be a homeless person or a passerby. But as I got closer, I realized that it was Blair. He stepped out of the shadows and smiled at me, his eyes gleaming in the darkness. I froze, unsure of what to do. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as he began to approach me. I tried to back away, but he grabbed my arm and pulled me towards him. "Please don't be afraid," he said, his voice low and husky. "I just wanted to see you again. I couldn't stop thinking about you." I tried to pull away, but his grip was too strong. I felt his hot breath on my face as he leaned in, his lips brushing against my cheek. I felt sick with fear and revulsion, wondering how I had ended up in this situation. Suddenly, there was a loud noise, and Blair jerked his head up. I turned to see a police car pulling up to the curb, its lights flashing. The officers jumped out and ran towards us, guns drawn. "Let her go," one of them shouted, his voice booming in the quiet street. Blair hesitated for a moment, then released his grip on my arm and stepped back. The officers rushed forward and handcuffed him, reading him his rights. As they led him away, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I had never felt so scared in my life. I thanked the officers and climbed into my car, shaking and trembling. Over the next few days, I learned more about Blair's past. He had a history of stalking and harassing women, and had even been arrested before for assault.